Okay, so we're just going to quickly go over some basic strategies for solving positive and negative integers in the way of addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. All right, so first for adding integers. So if you have two negative integers, say -5 plus -10, the answer is -15, because by adding a negative to a negative, you're just making it more negative. When you have one positive and one negative, it just determines whichever number is has the larger value is going to win over versus whether the answer is positive or negative. So in this case, -10, there's 10 negatives and only 5 positives, so the negatives win out because they have 5 more negatives than positives. And this one, I think I meant to say -5 plus 10. So in this case, the positives went out and we're left with +5. So when adding two negative integers, the answer is negative. Adding a negative and positive integer, it can be negative or positive for the answer, depending on whether positive or negative, put that in quotes, wins out. When we subtract integers, for example, if we have 5 and we take away 10, then we're going to end up in -5 as an answer. And that's because when we start with 5 and take away 10, so we're taking away 5 to get to 0, and then another 5 to take away a total of 10. So in total, we're going backwards 10, which results in -5. If we have -5 subtract 10, that's really just the same thing as having -5 and adding -10 to it. It equals -15 because we're starting with a negative and we're subtracting more. So same thing with this one. If we start with -10 and subtract 5, again, we're at -15. Now, this one is tricky. When you subtract a negative number, you can think of it as this negative comes over here, adds itself there to be positive, because that's exactly the same thing as saying 10 plus 5, which equals 15. Same thing with this subtracting a negative. That's the same thing as saying 5 plus 10, which equals 15. So really the main thing here to remember is subtracting a negative number is the same thing numerically as adding the positive version of that negative number. Multiplication and division is actually easier because there's just a couple rules and they're the same for both. So when we have a negative multiplied by a positive, we have 5 times 10, -50. Again, there's just one negative in here, -50. Now we have a negative times a negative, which is a positive. When you multiply two negative integers, the answer is positive. When you multiply one negative and one positive, the answer is negative. So in this case, two negatives make a positive. Exactly the same thing with dividing. So we have 10 divided by -5. We only have one negative involved, so our answer is -2. Again, with this one negative involved, -2. But this one, there's two negatives. -10 divided by -5 is +2. So exactly the same here. Dividing two negative integers gives us a positive. Dividing one positive and one negative gives us a negative. Otherwise, multiplication and division, you just perform exactly as normal. So you look at the numbers themselves, multiply them, or the numbers themselves, and divide them. The only thing that's different is whether it's a positive or a negative. And for more practice, I definitely encourage you to check out the worksheet with answers, just to make sure that you understand this. And if you're still having difficulty, just send me an email.